I didn't realize my marriage was already over until the night my own wife laughed at me, softly, casually, like I'd just told a bad joke instead of reaching for the woman I'd built my life around. That laugh didn't hurt at first. What hurt was how familiar it felt, like my body already knew the truth before my mind caught up. Before we go any further, do me a favor, hit subscribe, tap like, and drop a comment if any part of this feels uncomfortably familiar. You're not alone, and this story might hit closer to home than you expect. My name is David. I'm 56 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed loyalty and patience were enough to keep a marriage alive. I believed if you worked hard, paid the bills, stayed faithful, and showed up every day, love would naturally follow. That belief nearly erased me. That night was a Wednesday. I remember because Wednesdays used to mean something. Midweek dinners, shared exhaustion, small rituals that said we're in this together. I walked in late, jacket still smelling like copier toner and cold air, hoping stupidly for warmth, not fireworks, just recognition. Laura didn't look up from her phone. No smile, no question, no acknowledgement that the man she married had just walked through the door. I told myself not to read into it. I'd been telling myself that for months. Later, when the house finally went quiet, I reached for her. Nothing dramatic, just a hand, a signal, a question without words. She sighed like I'd asked her to move a couch, rolled her eyes, said she was exhausted, too exhausted for me. What stuck wasn't the rejection, it was what came after. 10 minutes later, the glow of her screen lit the room. Scrolling, typing, laughing at something someone else had said. Her energy hadn't disappeared. It had just been redirected, away from me. I lay there staring at the ceiling, counting backwards through time like a man searching rubble for something that used to breathe. When was the last time she touched me without obligation? When was the last time she looked at me like I mattered? 3 months. 3 months of polite distance. 3 months of sighs, excuses, impatience. 3 months of being made to feel like desire was a character flaw. And the worst part wasn't that she said no. It was how she did it. Like I was ridiculous for asking. Like I should be embarrassed for wanting my own wife. Lying there beside her, listening to her sleep peacefully, I felt something shift. Not anger, not sadness, but clarity. Sharp and cold. I wasn't being rejected as a husband. I was being dismissed as a man. And somehow, I'd allowed it. The next morning unfolded like every other. Coffee brewed, shoes by the door, familiar silence. Then Laura mentioned the bathroom faucet, said it was dripping again. She didn't ask if I could fix it. She assumed I would. That assumption did something to me. I looked at her and said, "You should handle it." She laughed, actually laughed, like I'd broken character in a sitcom. When I didn't smile back, her expression froze. Confusion crept in, slow and genuine. The man who fixed everything, who smoothed every inconvenience, who absorbed every frustration, had just stepped out of frame. "What's going on with you?" she asked. I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because for the first time in a long while, I knew exactly what was going on. That morning, I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't ask for anything. I left for work with a strange calm, like a decision had already been made somewhere deep inside me, one I hadn't fully named yet. What I didn't know then was how much silence can say, or how quickly absence can become louder than any confrontation. And that was only the beginning. Something strange happens when you stop chasing someone who's grown used to being chased. At first, nothing happens at all, and that silence is unsettling, because you expect resistance, confrontation, questions. Instead, life just keeps moving. And that's exactly how I knew I was doing something different. I didn't announce any change. I didn't sit Laura down for a heart-to-heart. I didn't demand therapy or threaten consequences. I simply stopped reaching, stopped adjusting myself to her moods, stopped acting like access to me was guaranteed. And for the first time in a long while, I noticed how much of my daily energy had been spent managing someone else's comfort. The first few days felt artificial, like I was playing a role I hadn't rehearsed for. I came home, said hello, and went about my evening without orbiting around her. No checking her tone, no waiting for cues, No silent negotiations for attention. I cooked my own dinner one night when she said she'd already eaten, took my plate to the living room, watched a game. She glanced over, clearly expecting me to ask if she was okay. I didn't. By the third day, the shift was noticeable. Not dramatic, subtle. Laura started watching me instead of ignoring me. Her eyes followed me around the room like she was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't come with instructions. When I told her I'd already eaten, she paused. When I said I had plans after work, she raised an eyebrow. "What plans?" she asked. "Just plans," I said. And that was the truth. For the first time in years, I was deciding my evenings based on what I wanted, not what kept the peace. I dug my old motorcycle out of the garage that weekend, the one I'd promised myself I'd fix someday, the one that had slowly become a symbol of everything I postponed for the sake of being available. I spent hours cleaning it, adjusting parts, getting my hands dirty. It felt grounding, real. When Laura called me in for dinner, I said I'd eat later. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me like I'd betrayed an unspoken agreement. And maybe I had. By the end of the Amateur week, I'd joined a gym, not to impress anyone, not to provoke jealousy. I joined because my body felt as neglected as my sense of self. Every evening I went, I felt a little more present inside my own skin. I came home tired, but clear. No resentment, no expectations. That's when the questions started. "Why didn't you text? Since when do you work out this much? You've been really distant." I didn't argue, didn't deny it, didn't apologize. I answered simply, calmly, like someone who wasn't afraid of being misunderstood anymore. The weekend arrived, and with it, the old routines. Or rather, the absence of them. Saturday mornings used to be reserved for chores I inherited by default. Fix this, lift that, handle whatever had broken during the week. That morning, I poured myself coffee, got dressed, and grabbed my keys. "Where are you going?" Laura asked. "Out," I said. She assumed errands, started listing things we needed. I stopped her mid-sentence and told her I wasn't doing house runs. I was going to look at fishing gear, something I hadn't done in years, something just for me. The look on her face wasn't anger. It was disbelief, like I'd spoken a language she didn't recognize. "What about everything else?" she asked. "You'll figure it out," I replied. And I meant it. Not cruelly, not dismissively. Matter of fact, that was the moment frustration replaced confusion. Not concern for our connection, not curiosity about how I felt. Frustration that her safety net was no longer stretched beneath her. The shift wasn't loud, it wasn't cinematic, but it was undeniable. I was no longer filling every empty space in her life, and she didn't know what to do with the silence I'd left behind. By the second week, the atmosphere in the house had changed in a way I couldn't have scripted if I tried. It wasn't hostile, it wasn't tense, it was unstable, like furniture had been quietly moved in the dark and no one wanted to admit they kept bumping into it. Laura was no longer ignoring me. She was monitoring me. That alone told me everything I needed to know. She started bringing things up casually, as if nothing was wrong. Her car was making that noise again. The shelves in the garage were still loose. A package needed to be returned. Each comment was delivered with the same tone she'd always used, the tone of expectation. I responded to everyone the same way, calm, detached, practical. "Call a mechanic. Hardware stores open until 7. You can return it on your lunch break." Each answer landed like a small shock. She wasn't angry yet. She was recalibrating, trying to understand whether this version of me was temporary or permanent. She asked once if I was upset. I told her no, and that was the truth. I wasn't upset. I was done negotiating my worth. What seemed to bother her most wasn't what I said. It was how I said it. There was no edge in my voice, no resentment to argue with, no emotional hooks to pull. Indifference is unsettling when someone's used to being the center of gravity. I started reconnecting with people I'd slowly drifted away from over the years. Old friends from work, a couple guys from the gym. Conversations felt lighter, honest. No one needed anything from me except my presence. I found myself smiling at my phone again, not because someone was flirting or praising me, but because I remembered who I was before my world had shrunk down to managing one person's moods. Laura noticed everything. The new clothes, the later evenings, the way I no longer rushed to fill silence with reassurance. One night she asked who I was texting. I told her the truth. Friends. She nodded, but something flickered behind her eyes. Not jealousy, uncertainty. By the third week, she started trying to reinsert herself into my orbit. Small things at first, suggesting a movie, sitting closer on the couch, making comments about how we've been disconnected lately. I responded politely, kindly, but without urgency. You can watch whatever you want. I'm good right now. I've got plans. Each time she looked surprised, not hurt, just surprised, like she expected resistance or enthusiasm and got neither. What she didn't understand was that I wasn't trying to punish her. I wasn't playing games. I wasn't strategizing. I was living honestly for the first time in years. I wasn't pretending intimacy could exist without respect. I wasn't pretending connection could survive contempt. One evening, she walked past me wearing a dress I hadn't seen in a long time. She lingered, sat beside me, started talking in a softer voice, the one she used back when effort felt mutual. I looked up, smiled, listened, and then went back to what I was reading. The silence afterward was heavy. She waited. I didn't move. Eventually, she stood up and left the room. I could almost hear the questions racing through her head. That was when she stopped trying subtlety and moved into irritation. She accused me of being distant, of shutting her out, of acting like a stranger. I listened, let her speak. And when she finished, I said something that ended the conversation immediately. I'm treating you the way you taught me to treat you. She didn't respond. She couldn't. There was nothing to argue with. No raised voice, no insult. Just a mirror. That weekend, she suggested dinner. Just the two of us. Months ago, I would have rearranged my entire schedule. That night, I told her I already had plans. When she asked with who, I said friends. When she asked why I hadn't told her earlier, I said I hadn't thought to. That's when the frustration finally cracked into anger. She said I was being immature, that my attitude was unnecessary, that I was blowing things out of proportion. I looked at her and, for the first time, spoke plainly. You don't get to ignore someone for months and then decide when they're available again. Her face went still. The truth had finally landed, but it hadn't been accepted. And I knew then that whatever came next wouldn't be quiet anymore. The argument that followed wasn't explosive. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no dramatic ultimatums. It was worse than that. It was cold, precise, and revealing in ways that can't be taken back. Laura stood there looking at me like I'd violated an unwritten contract she'd never actually explained, but fully expected me to obey. She told me I was acting like a different man. She said I was selfish, said marriage was about compromise. I listened, hands in my pockets, feeling oddly detached, like I was hearing a speech I'd already memorized years ago. When she finished, I asked her one question. What exactly have you been compromising on? She blinked, opened her mouth, closed it again. Then she started listing things, my long hours, my stress, my moods. She called my desire for closeness pressure. That word landed hard, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed something I'd been refusing to name. That conversation ended with me leaving the house, not storming out, just leaving. I went where I said I'd go, did what I said I'd do, and for the first time in months, I enjoyed myself without checking my phone. When I came home, she was waiting. Not worried, angry, demanding explanations, timelines, control. I told her calmly that I hadn't answered because I didn't feel like it. The look on her face said she'd never considered that option existed. That's when she accused me of tearing the marriage apart. I didn't argue. I said something that stopped her cold. I didn't break this. I stopped pretending it wasn't broken. The days that followed marked a shift. She tried bargaining, suggested counseling, suggested communication workshops, suggested anything that didn't require her to admit what she'd done. I told her I wasn't interested in fixing something with someone who didn't believe they'd contributed to the damage. Then she tried kindness, cooked my favorite meals, played music, created atmosphere. I thanked her, ate, then went back to my own plans. Romance without accountability feels hollow when you've lived without respect. By the end of the month, the consequences reached beyond our home. Her family noticed. Invitations came through her, not us. When she told me about a barbecue, I said she should go. When she asked if I was coming, I told her I had other plans. That sparked real anger. She accused me of embarrassing her. I told her the truth, that I'd spent years showing up out of obligation, not desire, and I was done doing that. That was when she said it. "This isn't the man I married." She was right, and for the first time, I didn't apologize for it. I told her the man she married didn't know his worth. That man accepted neglect and called it patience. That man no longer existed. She tried invoking vows, duty, commitment. I asked her where that commitment had been when she treated me like an inconvenience in my own home. She didn't answer. Instead, she involved other people. Her mother called me, accusing me of mistreating her daughter. I asked one simple question, whether she'd been told the whole story. The silence told me everything. Friends followed, advice filtered in, suggestions piled up, date nights, vacations, distractions. None of it addressed the core issue. And when she tried involving my own friends, framing my change as a crisis, I corrected the record calmly and completely. That confrontation at home afterward was raw. She accused me of airing private business. I pointed out she'd been doing exactly that, just without the full truth. Then I said the words she'd been avoiding for months. "You're not upset because I changed. You're upset because your actions finally had consequences." That night, she tried reaching for me again, not from desire, from panic. I declined, gently. And that's when she broke down, not in remorse, but in fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of losing certainty. Fear of losing the man who had always stayed no matter what. She asked me what I wanted from her. The question lingered, heavy with everything we hadn't said. I told her I wanted acknowledgement, responsibility, understanding, not gestures, not panic-driven effort, real awareness of what she'd done. She said she never meant to hurt me. I told her intent doesn't erase impact. That truth changed the air between us. And I knew then. We had reached the point where pretending was no longer possible. The house felt different after that conversation. Not tense, honest, the kind of quiet that doesn't beg to be filled. Laura went to work the next morning without saying goodbye. And for the first time in our marriage, that silence didn't sit heavy on my chest. It felt clean. Whatever happened next wouldn't be built on denial anymore. 2 weeks passed. We coexisted carefully, polite, civil, distant, but real. Then one evening she told me she'd scheduled counseling and said, without qualifiers, without excuses, that she was ready to take responsibility for her part in what had happened. I didn't respond immediately. Words had lost their power by then. I told her I'd watch her actions. The first session was uncomfortable in the way truth usually is. Laura talked about how I'd changed, how I'd grown cold. The therapist asked what things had been like before that change, and slowly, painfully, the truth surfaced. The months of rejection, the dismissive gestures, the withdrawal. Even then, Laura tried to justify it with stress and exhaustion. The therapist didn't let her hide behind that. When I was asked how it made me feel, I didn't soften it. I explained what it does to a man to feel unwanted by his own wife, what it costs to slowly disappear while still showing up every day. Laura didn't interrupt. She listened, really listened. That night, she apologized. Not the hollow kind, not the version that shifts blame. She said she was sorry for making me feel unwanted, sorry for taking me for granted, sorry for turning our marriage into something I endured instead of chose. I accepted the apology, but I didn't rush to erase the damage. Over the following weeks, she changed quietly. Put her phone down when we talked, asked questions and waited for answers, treated my time like it mattered. And when it came to closeness, the difference was undeniable. It wasn't obligation anymore, it was intention. But I didn't snap back into the man I used to be. I held my ground, maintained my routines, protected the version of myself I'd fought to reclaim. She noticed, said I was still keeping distance. I told her trust rebuilds slowly, and only with consistency. That truth frustrated her at first. Then she stopped pushing timelines and started focusing on effort, real effort, not to get things back to normal, but to build something better than what we'd broken. Months passed. The respect returned, not because I demanded it, but because I stopped accepting its absence. Our marriage didn't survive by rewinding, it survived by resetting. I learned something through all of this. You teach people how to treat you. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for someone else is refuse to accept being diminished. If this story resonated with you, if it made you reflect on your own life or relationship, take a moment to subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Your support keeps these stories alive, and your voice matters more than you know.